Today I want to talk to you about how I used contrast when I made my Camping Under the Stars project for Michael Miller Fabrics. Hi, I'm Kim from Chatterbox Quilts, and I recently completed a project using fabrics from the Happy Camper collection from Michael Miller Fabrics. So I want to say thank you to Michael Miller Fabrics for sending this fabric to me so I could make this project. Now, I chose this collection actually because of the fun, whimsical design, the little campers, the tents in it, all the camping things that you take with you, and I loved the colors as well. So you've got these bright pinks against a black background, there's teal, there's yellow, all these different colors, and it came with this fabulous striped fabric, which is great for borders and especially binding. So once I had all the fabric, then I had to decide what I was going to make with it, of course. Now, this collection comes with two different types of panels. There's some smaller ones, and those are the ones I wanted to use in my project. And I had to then build the rest of the project around those panels, which I figured I could get down to about 9.5 inches. So that's kind of where I started with my design. But there's all different kinds of fabrics and different colors in the collection, and to make an interesting and effective quilt, I had to figure out how I could use those fabrics, I should say, in the collection together, and that came down to making sure I had enough contrast where I needed it in the project. So as you can see, I've got some sawtooth stars. This is actually a 2x2 by 2x2, so 4 different panels because there's 4 different designs. So I had the 4 different panels. So this project started off with those panels in the center of a sawtooth star because I thought that would be a really good block to showcase those panels, and it worked really well actually. But as I went through, there were certain things I had to keep in mind, and I did mention contrast. So I was looking through the fabrics to see which ones would work well together, give the contrast where I needed it in this project to make that effective quilt. So talking about contrast, there's different kinds of contrast. So you can have contrast by using different colors, totally different colors. You can have contrast within one color by choosing different tones and shades and tints of that color. And I want to show you what I mean by that in case you're not familiar with some of those terms without getting too much into color. But you can see that in this fresco collection, this is also Michael Miller Fabric, beautiful blenders. You can also see in these that you're going from a lighter to a dark shade in these kind of purpley colors. And I've got the opposite here, so dark to light in these oranges. And remember, a fabric can be a light, a dark, a medium, depending on what other fabrics you put it with. So if you were working with one color, one hue, then you would have to make sure you've got contrast by lighter or darker fabrics with it in that same hue. Now, I didn't have to worry about that with the Happy Camper collection, thankfully. It makes it a little bit easier for you. But as I mentioned, I did have to consider contrast in certain areas. So I wanted to talk to you about where that was important. And I want to go through some of the choices that I made using the fabrics in this collection. So you've got those panels. That's where I started, right? The panels are going in the center. And you can see that the panels are on a cream background, right? So you've got all these other colors, but they're cream. So coming out to the edges, we're talking cream. So I needed a contrast, something that would contrast with that cream shade. So if I did not have that in these flying geese units that go around the center panel, you wouldn't see the points, the star points here of the sawtooth star. So you would lose the whole look of the block. So if, for example, you can see in this diagram that I've mocked up on EQ8, you can see if I had chosen some of the other cream fabrics in the collection that you wouldn't get that contrast and you really don't see the star points. Everything just blends together. Definitely not what you want. So looking for something that contrasts with the cream background, looking for a contrast in the colors in the flying geese as well, because that's, again, where you get those points sticking up of the star. So I had to look and find some fabrics in the collection that were going to work to contrast with the center panel background, and also that would contrast with one another to give those star points. So let me just get some of the fabric in the collection and show you what I tried and why some things worked and some things wouldn't work. So I mentioned that there were 4 different designs in the panel. So 2 have these little campers in them, like you see here, different panel, but they both have little campers in them. And then the other 2 have tents. So I decided I would do 2 with the camper that would have the same, like two colors for the flying geese. And then the other block, I would choose two other fabrics. So, you know, I mean, why make it easier for myself, right? So I had to do a little bit of thinking with this. But I chose this fabric first. This is the Pitch a Tent fabric from the collection. So I chose that to start with. So I knew that's what I wanted to use for my star points here. And then I had to pick the other part of the flying geese so that you would see those star points. So I had to have that contrast, right? So here's my Pitch a Tent fabric here. Let me just pull this over on the white here so you can see better. So there it is there, okay? And then I had to have something that contrasts with it. So I could have chosen the black. This is called Blinking Stars. There's different colorways in it. Now, you can see that there really isn't very much contrast there because they're both black. So that's not going to work. So off to the side that went. Now, what about this one? You have this color, this yellow color. That might have worked as well. But I also had to think about two other fabrics I'm using in the other block for the star points, right? Lots of thinking going on. But why don't we go with the most contrast you can get, the lightest of the fabrics in this cream shade, and the black Pitch a Tent. So that is actually what I did here, as you can see, and it works really well because you've got that contrast. Now, I did mention I wanted contrast to the cream background of the panels, right? And you definitely have that with the black, but you don't have it here, do you? But this is just a tiny little point that's touching, okay? There's just very little amount that's touching, so it really doesn't affect the panel. I wouldn't go the other way, though, and have the creams here because you can see that they're going right along the edge of the panel. Wouldn't have given much contrast there. Something else I want to talk about when you're talking about contrast, we're talking about contrast in color here, right? But you can get contrast in different ways as well, and that can be in the scale of the print on your fabric. So for example, this is probably about what I call a medium scale. This is definitely smaller. So that gives you a contrast as well, as opposed to putting, you know, two that are both the same if you went with both the stars. I know they're the same fabric, but, you know, it's not as interesting when you have the same size of scale next to one another either. You can't always change that, but something else to keep in mind. Okay, so I have chosen the two colors for the flying geese. That's going to work around the panel. That's all great. But then we also have cornerstones, don't we? So you can see we have 4 cornerstones in the Sawtooth Star. So I needed to put something in there. And this is, again, where we're talking about color, or, you know, what kind of a contrast can we have? So I chose this trailer park print here because, again, talking contrast, here's your dark, right, with the Pitch a Tent with the black background, and these, as you can see, have this cream background. So you've definitely got that contrast there, all right? Let's take a quick look at the other block because it's all different colors. So let's take a look at this second block with different colors in it. And again, you've got the cream background for the panel, so you want something that contrasts with that. So I chose this teal fabric, which is called Camping Life. And I also went with the Blinking Stars again, but this time in this yellow colorway. So it picks up this yellow that's in the Camping Life fabric, but there's enough of a contrast there to give it that interest. You can definitely see the star points pop out of that. Now, cornerstones, again, so again, I went with a cream background, so I'm sort of mimicking what's happened in the other block. This is called Life is a Journey, this fabric here. It's not really directional. It's kind of like a tossed print, we call it. But I did want to make sure that the Life is a Journey is on, part of it anyway, is on most of these cornerstones. I want to make sure they were all facing the right way. So I did think about that a little bit. Something to think about if you have directional fabric, of course. So I've got those in the corner as well. So both of the blocks, I think, work quite well as far as the contrast that I have created with the fabric choices I made. But we're not done yet, are we? Because there's more going on in this quilt. So I wanted to have some sashing in here, and sashing has cornerstones in it. Well, this one does anyway. So again, I wanted to divide these blocks off. Remember, there's 4 of them all together. And so to do that, I had to have, guess what, a contrast again. So there's actually another colorway in the Blinking Stars fabric, and that is a black. So the black is perfect because it creates a real division between those blocks. And with all the fabrics that are running up against it, you can see here, it's got to contrast everything. I mean, unless there was black coming up against it, that would be the only time that I wouldn't see that contrast really, right? So I did that, put those in, and you can see there's little cornerstones in these as well. And for those, I went with, guess what, Blinking Stars again in a teal colorway. So here you've got, you don't have the difference really. I would say they're both medium dark sort of colors. But you've got the contrast in, or I should say fabrics, but you've got the contrast in colors here for sure. So they do pop out. I mean, you don't want them to stand out above anything else, but you do want to see that they're there. So that's what I did for those. And I think that worked out quite well. Creates like a border around all the different blocks so that they kind of are highlighted. After I've got the cornerstones and sashing done, there was still another border to consider. So let me pull this over so you can see it. So you can see here I've got this wider border and there's cornerstones there too. So this fabric was really easy for me to pick because it was the multi-stripe fabric and it is just gorgeous. It's got all the colors in the collection in it. Love, love, love stripes in borders and for binding as well. So that was an easy choice and it worked really well because you can see how much lighter it is than the black. So it really frames everything really nicely, pulls all those colors in. And for the cornerstone, I often do this with my project. I like to have the cornerstones go out to the next border. And so I use the teal Blinking Stars fabric again. And of course it's darker than the border fabric. So it stands out on its own as well. So it worked really well, I think. So everything tied together, of course, it is all one collection. Here you can sort of see how it all would fit together with the different blocks. So I've got the same blocks opposite to one another here. And I think it turned out quite nice, actually. And of course, when you're working with a fabric collection, that always makes it really easy. But if you're not working with a fabric collection, keep in mind some of these contrasting ideas. So you can have the contrast in color, contrast in value if you're working in the same color or hue. You can have contrast between the scale of the prints in the fabrics as well. That can be very effective too. Now, I've talked about color and fabric and contrast. I wanted to talk a bit about how I constructed this project because, as you saw, there's flying geese in it. And we've got that center panel that I wanted to make sure was just perfect when I cut it, which can sometimes be a bit tricky. So I want to show you how I did those two things, and we're going to start with the center panel. So let's talk about those panels and how I got them to that 9.5-inch unfinished size. So here are the 4 different little panels that you can get in this collection. I think they're super cute. I just love the whimsical look of this collection. It's totally my style. And you can see that there's lots of room around these panels. So you've got lots of room to cut them, and you could cut them out with around this wooden frame. Now, those are a little bit bigger than what would work in the project I had planned. So I actually needed to cut them down a little bit, right? And I wanted to do that easily, let's say, okay? And I knew I had a tool that would do that. So I got out my Martelli Fussy Cut windows, and there's a 9.5 one in one of the sets. And I could take it and I could move it around to get it exactly where I want it, knowing I'm going to be cutting in just a tad on them. So I could do this, like say on this particular one, and then I take the 9.5-inch square template, pop it in the center, take off the window, and then I could just cut around it and know that I'm going to have that perfect 9.5-inch square and have the details of that panel that I want in that square when I cut it. So that was super helpful in this project. Now I also had to make flying geese, right? So I want to show you what I used to do those. I had to make quite a few flying geese for this project, and there's lots of different ways to make flying geese. You can make them 1 at a time, you can make them 4 at a time, you can make them 8 at a time. But whatever method you use, I always think it's better to make them a bit bigger and trim them down to get really accurate flying geese. So what I did for this particular project is I used a tool called the Wing Clipper 1, and this is from Studio 180. And this is what they do. They have you make them bigger and then trim them down. And it's actually a 4 at a time method. So I needed a 4.5 by 9-inch finished flying geese unit. Okay, that's how long this is, 9 this way and 4.5 that way finished. And to start and to do that particular method, you start with a big square, 10.5 inches, and you have 4 smaller squares that are 5.5 inches. That's for the particular size I'm talking about. There's all different sizes, of course, and they have instructions to tell you how to do that. But that's what I use. So you make these and then you trim them down, and there's just very, very, very little bit of trimming on these, but they come out super accurate. So that's what you want. You don't want to have cut off tips or things like that. So that's how I made the flying geese here. You can use other methods, as I mentioned. There's lots of different ways to make them, but my suggestion is whatever method you use, make them bigger, trim them down, and you're going to get that accurate Flying Geese unit that you want. So this is my Camping Under the Stars project that I made with the Happy Camper collection from Michael Miller Fabrics. Again, thanks to them for providing me with the fabric to make this particular project. Now, while I've talked about contrast today and how you can use fabrics in a collection to come together to make an effective quilt, you may be wondering, how do you pull fabrics together that aren't in a collection? So if you're wondering that, don't worry, I've got you covered. Make sure you check out this video here. It'll give you all the information that you need. For more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.